what we do is getting people out of that dichotomy between having a winner and a loser. And I think the assumption is that the only solution that's not a winner and a loser is a compromise.
Which it's not.
And which is not.
No.
You're losing something when you compromise and you give something up.
I think that, yes, that's why this was so interesting, because there usually is in the mediation a stronger, more passionate, more maybe rigid partner in a conflict, and there's one that maybe gives a little bit more or seems to be a little bit more understanding, but it's so much dependent on the baggage that both of them bring to the table. Do you find that?
I guess so maybe. I think it depends a little on we talked about this earlier, that every situation is completely different, and you could do divorce, as you've done, or I do a lot of family disputes and housing issues where I work. We're a community mediation center, and so people come in with all sorts of issues. And you can see a noise dispute that on the surface looks the same, right? Someone is complaining about the noise coming from upstairs. The person downstairs who's upset about it is then banging on the floor, banging on the ceiling, banging on the pipes, and really irritating the person upstairs who's being accused of making noise. Maybe they have a 3-year-old kid at home who's running. And you could see that as a mediator and think, okay, I know what the solution is. There's soundproofing, there's, you can do a schedule, you can do those things that people do in those situations, but every situation is unique. And so sometimes there's more of a give and take, and sometimes not. Yeah.
I guess the most important thing that I even was looking for here, actually, in the play, were the primary goals of listening, understanding, and appreciating the other party's point of view. And what do you think? I mean, did you think that either one of them were doing that, or did you think one was doing less and one was doing more?
Thanks. Well, I think Jamie thought Marcus was presenting himself as an agreeable person in a way that was actually irritating and part of the conflict for Jamie. What about for you?
Well, I don't know, maybe it was maybe took it a little bit too obviously, but I thought that Jamie was coming up, had so much anger and so much, again, baggage that he was bringing to the table, and maybe antipathy, because Marcus had a much more privileged life than he did. So he started off not appreciating or overriding what Marcus was saying, because he came in with the preconceived notion that Marcus didn't have the understanding that he did for most of the situations, because he didn't have the hard life that he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's what I got. Did anyone else feel that way?
Yeah.
Yes?
I thought one of the rock and the hard place at the end had to do with their history.
Yeah.
And they can't compromise on their history. It's happened already.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you see that?
So for me as a mediator, when I'm working, my goal is not to get people to a solution. Ironically, we think of mediation as a conflict resolution process with the objective of helping people solve problems and see things kind of on the same page. But as a mediator, I would say my job is to help people seek clarity. And that could be clarity about what's important to them, and clarity about how they're presenting themselves and acting in this situation, and maybe clarity if they're willing to understand what's important to the other person. So I guess the reason I was so frustrated when it ended is because they were just getting some clarity about where they were coming from, but I think because of it's really common in
Yes.
in all sorts of relationships, especially close relationships, that the triggers kind of get in the way of being able to move forward, and you get stuck in the cycle.
You get rigid. Yeah, that's right.
So,
That's right. Yeah.
I was thinking, like, if there was a mediator there, wow.
What was the wonderful thing was, did they find a common ground at the end of what we look for, right, in mediation? Is to find, I mean, sometimes, yeah, but to find some common ground where they can launch from, to find some, you know, some point of reference for them to understand each other, you know,
Or decide how to move forward.
or decide how to move forward, exactly.
I thought they found common ground. They both agreed to come back tomorrow night and do it, number one. Number two, I think they both were heard. And I also do mediation, and they were both heard. They were both expressive and listening. And there was no resolution, but that's not, as you said, the point. And the process of life goes on. So I thought, honestly, it was a very honest play. It was a very revealing of both people, nature. I thought it was great.
They got to this point of revealing, but then they weren't able to figure
But
out
they're
what to
going
do
to come
with
back. But they agreed to come back, just like in a marriage.
Tomorrow,
And therefore life goes on. We have an opportunity tomorrow to figure something else out. I didn't think it was necessary for them to do more work tonight.
It seemed to be more of a gadget of the play, though. In other words, that they agreed to come back tomorrow, because obviously they're going to have a show almost. It was almost like, I couldn't tell if it didn't seem like they had any common ground at all. I didn't get any sense of any kind of resolution. They just seemed to be going at each other steadily and consistently. They had very strong positions about each other and about their lives, and they didn't seem to be even remotely having any impact on each other. And the only common ground was what you said, that they agreed to come back tomorrow night.
And I disagree with my friend.
Yeah. And there's a hand up,
They did
too.
have a lot of common ground. They both enjoyed the process, they both enjoyed
Yeah, exactly.
competitiveness, they both enjoyed expressing their feelings, even though they may not see things the same way. I think they both actually enjoyed the entire relationship.
And you had your hand up, too.
Yeah, I had a trigger. I mean, I'm Nigerian, and I really felt insulted by the one-off, like, is Africa is a loser. And then the minute that happened, then I could not check in for the rest of the play. And I actually did not care about your idea of mediation. I see what you do. But it almost became for me this like treatise on self-absorption in Western culture and how we can actually get caught up in our individuality and not take into account that like the world is live and there's other things going on. And that just might be my African sensibility. But I was completely insulted and I could not like check in the rest of the play.
Well, thank God you were not the mediator, because that would be a problem.
Yeah, but I think the idea of mediation too, this to me is a very Western thing. I'm still thinking about the idea of mediation and like what it means to just like listen to two people and actually think that their privilege shows by being able to just talk a lot about things.
But what would be the option other than mediation?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm just responding viscerally.
In conflict resolution.
I have no
I mean,
idea.
that's the point about, do you find that too? Everybody brings baggage to the table, brings emotions, brings history, brings experience, life experience. And I'm glad you brought that issue up, because one of the things that mediators have to do is not introduce their a life experience, maybe life experience, but not their judgments, their prejudices, you know, or anything like that to the table, because you just want to, the concept is listening and understanding and appreciating differing points of view, right?
And what I was thinking when you were talking, I think we wrestle with this concept of the construct of mediation as maybe we practice it, and conflict resolution as a Western construct. And I also work with people who use these processes all over the world. And so I think there is a way that conflicts are addressed in every culture, in every context. It might look different, right? So in some places, it's someone who's really respected in the community versus where we practice it. You're talking about the neutrality, right? When people come to us at the New York Peace Institute, it's because they don't know us. It's because we don't have a continuing relationship, and it's private and it's confidential. And so that's really different. But I was also thinking when I was watching, they're very quick, they're very verbal people, and mediation can work really well for that. And as a mediator, it's hard when you have someone coming from that culture and someone together who's slower to get clarity about what they're trying to say, who may take longer when they're talking. And those are dynamics we see often that you have to kind of wrestle with, I think, in the process. I don't have a great conclusion, but I think what you raised is really important.
Forgive me for changing the subject. I'm just very curious in the way that you're discussing this. One would imagine or assume that it's completely unscripted. So when they come back tomorrow night, back to the marriage, are they now going to move onward, or is it?
I would
to some
assume
extent
not.
Scripted?
I would assume not.
Right, I assume it's scripted to some extent.
Yeah, I would assume.
I just wanted-
Raphael, I believe it's like
So that's
90% scripted.
80% scripted,
Thank you.
with some variations.
Yeah.
What about when they elicit prompts from the audience? Is that more improvisational?
No, that's improv.
That's all, that's fair about it. That's fine, sometimes on occasion you can get a series of and that's why I always feel shitty when I have to shut it down. I say we can't, because it's true, it just goes on for too long, and once you get 90 minutes, it's just, every minute goes about 3 minutes inside of it, so that's obviously, the first little bit's improv, we scatter improv throughout, just to kind of keep ourselves on our toes
Yes.
and sharp.
Right.
And then, 80% is scripted, and inside that 80% there's lots of room for modification, twisting inside of the rapid fire thing where Africa lands inside of that. Africa we often do, because it is so incendiary, I think. But that's all the improv. There's probably about 30 different ones that we kind of throw around, and then we stuff in the news every day that we kind of chuck into it. But that's the figure.
The ping pong?
Ping pong is improv. I'm going to lose. I've got a ping pong ball. We're home in practice here. It's okay.
Oh, so you don't miss on purpose to elicit that
No.
response?
No, indeed.
You're not
I
that
was
good at
wondering
ping
how
pong.
that works.
I only about 5% of the time.
I'm a better ping pong player than you.
Okay.
And I I've heard of it. I just want to respond to your thing too, like, because it's so interesting to me because of those triggers. And Jamie sometimes will throw new material in, and I'll get really triggered by something, right? And I'll just be like, well, one friend who really who's a colleague and someone we respect a lot. We talked about it in relationship to that idea, and I can't remember whose idea that it is, but the narcissism of small differences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that seems to me really like partly a manifestation of the show, but partly also what we're interested in is that how this paradigm acts out and doesn't go where you guys are talking about, but goes the other way, and yet the levels of privilege, geographic privilege, heteronormative privilege, you can list them right now, that are occurring between us. There's the difference in class, but are huge, right? And so that's just interesting to me, as a thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess, from a practitioner's perspective, the small differences sometimes matter, right? It might seem, if I'm mediating, I could be totally bored by what the conversation is, but it could be crucial to what is going on for the people. It could be the biggest crisis they've ever experienced. So, yeah. In developing this and being really honest with each other, do you manage to get past the impasse? What happens there? Off stage?
Off stage after doing the show.
Or while you were developing it?
When we were making
Did you have to work those things out
We
in
did.
order to be able to keep up with each other?
Yeah, there's a series of steps. The first thing we did when doing all the improvs on tape before they were transcribed, we did them all with very funny Russian accents because we were in the Russian hall, and I can't do a Russian accent to save my life, but it allowed a clown sort of persona to say the nastiest things possible, and then we'd have them transcribed, and we took the accents off and started to talk. Through the process of building it, we thought we could make it by ourselves. And there came a point where we were trying to actually set the script where we couldn't anymore. Because if we put this bit in, I needed that bit in. If he put that in, we needed that in. So we had to bring in our mediator, which was our director, who then applied drama to it. And he said, well, you need this to lead to that, to lead to that.
And he played a real mediation role, actually, just as you say, like, just speaking in terms of mediate, like, he really did, because there was a time in the development of it when we kind of hit the kind of apex of like, because we knew we needed a drama, we needed it to be conflict, we needed to investigate this conflict, where we needed help, we couldn't do it on our own. That said, I will say, like, I've never been as open or gone as deeply in relationship, I'll just speak for myself, in relationship to the privilege that I bring to my experience of this world as with anybody than Jamie. Like, I've gone way deeper into that with him than anybody.
And were you allowed to be honest I guess in the improvisational section, did you process it a lot more, or did you just let it go?
Mostly let it go. I mean, there were occasions when I processed it. I mean, I think the thing when James says we did these accented improvs, like, we didn't realize how competitive our improv, we were just playing the game winner and loser, name a person, place, thing, debate whether it's winner or loser. It was only when we read the transcripts afterwards when we were able to see how competitive we were with each other and how nasty sometimes, when it was feeling like a game, like fun, good time. And that again was interesting to us.
And you're really getting to the issue of winning and losing. I mean, is that was the motivation?
That was
times
competition. Yeah.
Competition. It was a question of who would
Yeah,
win,
we wanted
lose
to. I
at
think
each
we
point.
felt we had a friend who went through this thing, and I won't explain it all, but like that kind of made us think about competition and assessing our lives in middle age, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's fair to say that Jamie and I both occupy a very similar position in the Vancouver theater community as people, as practitioners, as and feel both great respect and love for each other, and also that competition thing ticks most actively, or in relationship to each other. So it was like, okay, so there's this thing acting us all the time, and it's in the world everywhere. And so what happens if we investigate it?
Going and proving yourself and being the right one. Winning. And of course the other person is always the wrong one.
Yeah.
And they come in that way to our doors.
Can you say something about the power relationship here that was, it kept bouncing a little bit. There was the guy who had privilege, and then there's the guy who has grit, and then there's the guy who's an immigrant, and the guy who's always been here. And there's, that kind of power struggle that happens when people disagree. And what do you do with that, especially when the power is, harmful and abusive between, men and women, or
well, I mean, do you find that there is definitely a role play here where one party usually is talking over the other person or assuming what the other person is saying is wrong, and so then that's when you have to apply all your mediation skills and do your looping and having one person say and then repeating what that person says and then asking the other person, whether that's what they got from what the person said. So that's where where all the tools come in. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I guess one thing is that I don't think power is always obvious, and I think it shifts, and I think it comes from different things. So yeah, there's money, and there's socioeconomic status, and there's race, and there's all sorts of privileges that could lead to power. There's also, we work with employees and employers. The employee always has an upper hand in some way because they have hired this person. But power can also come from the ability to articulate what matters to you, from the ability to know what matters and to communicate that. So I think power shifts, but we also would be really, really mindful of something that crossed into anything that we flagged as potentially abusive. The way we practice mediation, it's not a safe intervention, and so we would find some safe way to end the process, and we actually screen cases that involve intimate partners intensively where I work, because we will not mediate if we feel that someone's safety could be at risk, because mediation is about people making decisions in their own self-interest, and if there's intimidation or fear of retribution, you might not be able to make that decision. So I would say
You draw the line.
there's a line, but otherwise you're using all the techniques and the skills to help people communicate and bring what matters to them onto the table.
Yeah. The primary tools, of course, is just to instill a need for respect, in the room, respect for each other, mutual respect. Mutuality is really key. What we try to stress is to, when we begin, right? A mutual respect. And that's why that it would be interesting to apply that theory to the play. I mean, there was then mutual respect between the characters. I guess it surfaced sometimes and sometimes it didn't.
You abruptly start to wrestle. That's an abrupt
Yes,
maneuver.
yes.
Why?
Technically for dynamic, just to get us to shut up for a little while, just a shift in the energy, I think. Dramaturgically, you could read it as I left, I thought about it, I went pee, I came back, and I said I'll just give him a good old beating to kind of just level the play. After the global or the worldly wise stuff where he dominates, I return and say, well, let's just make this very, very simple.
Or primitive? I mean, announcing you're going to pee is a primitive kind of male thing to do, right?
It is.
I thought, I mean.
Yeah,
I
no, it
thought
is, and
that.
it's a tactic.
So the abrupt introduction of that primalness, I loved, and I'm not sure why.
Well, I think for me, it speaks to like Jamie's tactics, or what Jamie identifies as the character Jamie identifies as his strength, where he can dominate.
That's his power.
As his power, yeah.
At the end of the day.
But you participate.
Yeah,
You had a
yeah,
choice.
that's interesting. I mean,
You had a choice.
yeah, the sort of the rule of the game, I don't know how you would know this in the audience, but the sort of the rule of the game is kind of like, whatever, like it's improv, right? So it's like, you gotta say yes, like whatever it is, you gotta say, you gotta go, like, and, which is kind of like the rule of competition in the world, to some extent, maybe, like, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I mean, if we think of the world in the competitive context we're always in, like, I don't know, or I think about like governance or something, or like, if it's Congress or Parliament or something, like, that you don't get to go, I don't participate, like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to play the game.
I think that's true, but I also think we teach young kids to say no all the time.
Absolutely.
To power. So
absolutely.
There is that.
Well, it's kind of a macho imperative too, right?
Yeah.
Like, to not back down from the fight. Like,
Yeah.
I feel that all the, I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah.
But like, I know that feeling as a male, like when that macho thing's introduced, like you gotta fucking step up or you're a wuss, right?
I was just wondering if there were two women on stage with that
Be
dynamic.
very different. We've talked about that show.
Yeah.
What would that show be? We've got ideas about who those two women would be. Actually, kind of like who we know, performers we know who match kind of interestingly in the same way.
When you were talking about respect, just to go back to that, I guess I saw it a little differently, because I think you wouldn't have bothered. You wouldn't have cared if you didn't. I mean, maybe respect isn't the right word, but care. Like, you cared enough to want to get there.
Yeah.
And there was appreciation of both your views, and that came across, right? Which is what we strive for when we are mediating, for both parties to have some appreciation for the other person's point of view or needs, right?
I think there's different mediation practices, and when I'm mediating, I'm not thinking about getting one person to care about what the other one is saying, but giving them that opportunity so that they can make the choice if they want to get there.